Alright, the way this is alternator set up, it feeds directly into the starter. That's just the way this one is set up. So there's also another cable that comes from the car, from the battery, that goes on top of this. But just so you know, that's how it's positioned, just like that, okay? This cable, or this tube, comes up to the top of the intake manifold, which is on the back side of the engine, or the firewall side. And then there's another one here that goes up to the top of the intake manifold as well, which we'll come to as we put that intake manifold on. Okay, now that I've got the engine on the side, I'm going to go ahead and put in the studs for the intake manifold so that it can accept the intake manifold. So here are the studs, and the Torx bit is facing out. Okay. Now we're going to want to make sure that this surface is completely clean on both sides of the intake manifold and the head before you go and install this. If not, it will leak. So just be careful. I'm not cleaning it just because I'm showing you guys how to put this thing back together after you've got it from the machine shop. But for you guys, as you're assembling this, make sure that you clean all the debris off of there. So the Brylock wheel, sandpaper, you know, razor blade, just whatever it takes to get it clean. You want to do that before you go and put this on. Alright, now that I've got all the bolts installed, what I have here is a Torx bit. You can kind of see what that looks like. Alright, now this is a Torx bit, it's called E7. That's what you need to tighten these down. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now I'm going to put together the intake manifold. Now I've removed everything. I cleaned it all out and painted it, just partly so that you guys can see. Right here is your fuel rail, your 4 fuel injectors, your purge solenoid, your vapor canister type thing. So this is kind of, has to go in just right. And I think we should probably put this in first. Careful, because these tubes are kind of fragile. So try to get those out of the way first. Okay. Tilt it up a little bit. Just trying to be stubborn. Okay. It shouldn't be too hard to position. Just want to make sure that that tube is facing the right direction, because I believe it goes down underneath the intake manifold and connects to that purge solenoid that's mounted to the block. Okay, and I think this is it's kind of a relief, like that. Trying to think of two things at once. So get this all lined up. And if I remember, it was pretty hard to get out. So just don't force it. Just get it all positioned and lined up. Then we're going to take our 10mm bolts. There's only 3 of them. Put those into position. And they've got little slides in there, so they have to be kind of just right. You don't want to over tighten these because they will crack that fuel rail because it's only plastic. One of those, actually that's not that's an 8mm, not a 10. I need to go grab that. So 8mm, go ahead and zip this down. And just kind of snug them all up before you crank them all down. You want to make sure that you don't tighten it down all at once because it is a plastic rail. Okay. And these things are adjustable, so you can move the ejectors just a little bit, okay, if you need to when you go to connect the wires up. I apologize for that last clip. I didn't realize you were that far out. So this bracket right here, this is for the throttle cable. So, and it goes on just like this. Then we have two 10mm bolts. Okay, now we're going to do what I believe is called the map sensor. It just has a little bit of O-ring right here, one little hole, and just kind of fit that into place. And then we have two 8mm bolts. Just like that. All right, now we're going to install the PVC valve, the little tube. That goes right into the top of the valve cover. Now what we have here is our EGR valve, which mounts right here. Just set that in position. Then we have two, can't really see that, can you? Get a better angle here. So we have the EGR valve that sits right there, and then two 10mm bolts. Now I took all this stuff apart and cleaned it just for you guys so that you can see really well. I wanted to have a really good visual picture for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy having a nice clean picture. It helps to have parts clean. It really makes a difference. Okay. Now our next step is the throttle body. So the way that's positioned, remember right here I was showing you this is the cable that connects to here. This is the mount bracket. So what we want to do is position the throttle body in just like this. Got two 10mm bolts that hold that in. Okay. Now I already took the throttle body off and I didn't do a video. I apologize for that. But I took all the throttle body apart, all inside here. Took the throttle positioning sensor out, the airflow sensor, took all that stuff out to clean all that. So it would be really nice as we put it back together for you guys. So take these 10mm, zip those down. The last thing is our little vacuum tube. This goes right on top, snaps in, and there is one tube that goes down to the purge solenoid on the fuel rail, and then there's another one that goes down to the solenoid on the block. They only go one way. If you look, you can see the holes are a different size. You can see that. So they only go on one way, so you can't get them backwards. So this tube that we're trying not to break, it's very fragile. It comes up right here, connects into the top. Then this tube goes down and connects to the purge solenoid on the block. All right, our next step, put the gasket down. We'll go grab our intake manifold and we will set it in position. It obviously only goes on one way. I'm going to set in the PVC valve. Okay. And then we will go ahead and tighten down the bolts. Okay, now that we've got the intake manifold in position, if you ever try to do this in the car, it's one of the reasons I cleaned all this up so that you guys can actually see what we're doing. There's a couple ones that are really hard to get to from inside the car if this is mounted. This is one of them that's really hard to get to. And then there's another bolt straight down here that's really hard to get to. Okay, so as you're pulling it apart, make sure you remember. You got this bolt here, 13mm. I believe there are 13 of these. Let me double check. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So there's actually 9 bolts, all being 13 millimeter. Okay, that hold that in, and then there's also a bracket that goes from here to there. So I grab that. I believe this bracket somehow goes from here to there, like that. Okay. Okay, now that we've got all of the bolts in, we will just go ahead and tighten them all down. I recommend you start from the middle, do these 2 bolts, these 2 bolts, these 2, these 2, and then these 2, and then do your bracket last. We'll do that now. Okay, now that we've got the intake manifold together, our next step is the power steering pump. Power steering pump has, and I took it off and painted it so you could see better. So it has 3 bolts, this one, and this one that hold the bracket to the pump. But now we have 1, 2, 3 that hold the bracket to the actual block. So it's positioned in here just like this. Okay, and then it takes 3 10 millimeter bolts that hold the pump to the engine block itself. All right, I moved the camera a little bit so you can see better. So you have 1 10 millimeter bolt right here, another one right here. Okay, then you have 1 more right up here towards the top of the head. And then I'll just go ahead and zip those down.